My fiancée lied about our wedding budget and secretly planned her exit with her ex. Now, I'm exposing everything and walking away. I proposed to my fiancée, Sarah, last year. Everything seemed perfect. We'd been together for 3 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I thought we were solid. She'd always talked about wanting a fairy tale wedding, but I figured she just meant the usual Pinterest-worthy setup. A nice venue, good food, friends and family. I didn't realize just how serious she was about the fairy tale part. A few months ago, we started planning. I'll admit, I was excited too. This was the woman I wanted to marry, after all. But as we began looking at venues, dresses, and everything else, the costs started piling up quickly. Sarah fell in love with this massive luxury estate that charged $25,000 just for the venue. Then there was the catering, the flowers, the live band, the designer dress. Every time we talked about it, the budget just kept growing. One night, as we were going through numbers, I sat her down and said, "Hey, I think we need to be realistic here. Weddings are expensive, but we don't have to go all out. Maybe we could aim for something more within our means." She froze for a moment and then gave me this look, like I just suggested we get married in a gas station parking lot. "This is my dream wedding," she said, her voice trembling like she was on the verge of tears. "I've been dreaming about this day since I was a little girl. Don't you want me to have that?" Of course, I wanted her to be happy, but I also couldn't ignore the reality of our finances. I make a decent living, but we'd have to take out a significant loan, around $60,000, to make this wedding happen. $60,000. For one day, I tried to explain my concerns to her. "Sarah, I love you, but this kind of debt is going to follow us into our marriage. That's a huge financial burden. What if we compromise? We can still have a beautiful wedding, just on a smaller scale." She didn't take it well. "Compromise?" She snapped. "Why should I have to compromise on my dream just because you're being cheap? Do you even care about me?" That stung. I care about her deeply, but I also care about our future. Debt like that isn't just some minor inconvenience, it's a life-altering commitment. I tried to keep my cool and suggested alternatives, eloping and saving for a big party later, scaling back the guest list, even using some of our savings to cover part of the cost. But every suggestion I made was shot down. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "I should have known you'd be like this." The next day, she started acting distant. She stopped bringing up the wedding altogether, which honestly gave me some relief. I thought maybe she was cooling off and rethinking things, but then I started noticing my mom and sister were acting weird. They weren't answering my calls as much, and when I finally got a hold of my mom, she sounded off, like she was upset with me but didn't want to say it outright. Eventually, my sister called me and let it slip. "Sarah told us about your little fight. Honestly, I can't believe you're being so selfish." Selfish, that word hit me like a punch to the gut. I asked her what she was talking about, and she said, "Sarah told us you promised her the wedding of her dreams, and now you're backing out." How could you do that to her? I was floored. I never promised anything like that. I've been upfront about finances from the start, but apparently Sarah had told my family that I'd agreed to her dream wedding and then changed my mind because I didn't care enough about her happiness. She made me sound like the bad guy. I tried explaining my side to my sister, but she wasn't having it. "Sarah's right, you're being cheap. If you love her, you'll find a way to make it work." When I hung up, I felt sick. Not only was Sarah angry with me, but now my own family was turning against me. I couldn't believe she'd go behind my back like that. It felt manipulative, and honestly, it made me question everything. Was this the person I was supposed to spend my life with? That night, I confronted Sarah. I told her I knew she'd talked to my family and asked her why she felt the need to twist the story. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "I wouldn't have had to say anything if you weren't being so unreasonable," she said. "Your family agrees with me, by the way. They think you're being ridiculous." That was the moment I started to see her differently. She wasn't just hurt or upset. She was actively trying to paint me as the villain to get her way. I told her it wasn't fair to involve my family like this, and she just shrugged. Maybe you should think about why they're on my side. Over the next few days, the pressure kept building. My mom called me, practically begging me to reconsider. This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life, she said. Don't you want to make her happy? Be a man and step up. Hearing those words from my own mom hurt more than I can put into words. I felt like I was being ganged up on, like no one cared about what I wanted or how I felt. It was all about Sarah's dream, no matter the cost. Then Sarah hit me with the ultimatum. Either you take the loan or this relationship is over. I was stunned. After 3 years together, she was willing to throw it all away over a wedding. I told her I needed time to think, but the truth is, I don't even know what there is to think about. This whole situation has made me question everything. Our relationship, her priorities, even my own family. If they're so quick to take her side without even hearing me out, what does that say about them? What does it say about her? I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to fight for this relationship because I still love her, but another part of me wonders if I've been blind to who she really is. Am I being unreasonable, or is this a massive red flag? I honestly don't know what to do. Update. After Sarah told me it was either the $60,000 loan or the end of our relationship, I felt completely trapped. I loved her, at least, I thought I did, and the idea of losing her was terrifying. But at the same time, I couldn't get over the fact that she was willing to blow up our future over one day. I spent days replaying our arguments in my head, trying to figure out if I was the one being unreasonable. Was I actually being selfish? Was I letting her down? During that time, Sarah gave me the silent treatment. She barely spoke to me unless it was to ask if I'd made a decision yet. Every time she did, I felt this pit in my stomach, like I was being pushed into a corner. But then she'd sweeten the deal, saying things like, "This is the only wedding I'll ever have. Don't you want it to be special?" She made it sound like I was the one ruining everything. Meanwhile, my family kept piling on the pressure. My mom called me almost daily, asking why I was dragging my feet. She told me that Sarah was devastated and that I was being stubborn for no reason. At one point, she even said, "If this is how you treat your fiancé, maybe you're not ready for marriage." That comment broke me. I felt like everyone was ganging up on me, and no one cared about how I felt. I started doubting myself so much that I almost gave in, but something about the whole situation just felt off. Sarah wasn't acting like the person I'd fallen in love with. She'd always been a little materialistic, sure, but this was on another level. And the way she turned my family against me, it didn't feel like the actions of someone who truly loved me. I started wondering if there was more to this than I was seeing. The breaking point came a couple of weeks later. I was working late one night, and when I came home, Sarah was already asleep. Her laptop was open on the dining table, and the screen lit up when I walked by. I wasn't planning on snooping, but then I saw her messages with her best friend pop up. One line caught my eye. "Don't worry, he'll cave. He always does." I froze. My heart started pounding, and I knew I shouldn't keep reading, but I couldn't stop myself. I sat down and scrolled through their conversation, and what I found made my stomach turn. Sarah had been venting about me for weeks, calling me cheap and pathetic. She told her friend she was just waiting for me to crack, because she knew I didn't have the guts to stand up to her. And then there was the worst part. She joked about how, once we got the money, she could finally have the life she deserved, whether it was with me or not. I kept scrolling, and it only got worse. There were messages about her reconnecting with her ex. Apparently, they'd been talking for months. She told her friend that she wasn't doing anything wrong, but liked having a backup plan, just in case. My hands were shaking at this point. I couldn't believe what I was reading, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to her behavior. She was glued to her phone constantly, and whenever I walked into the room, she'd lock the screen or put it face down. I also noticed some questionable expenses on our shared credit card, high-end clothing stores, spa appointments, and even a deposit for a luxury honeymoon package. I hadn't agreed to any of it. When I confronted her about the honeymoon deposit, she brushed it off. I just wanted to be prepared, she said. It's not a big deal, but it was a big deal. She'd made a $5,000 payment without even telling me. At that point, I realized she wasn't just being pushy about the wedding. She was completely disregarding me and our future together. Still, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself maybe she was just stressed, or maybe she didn't realize how her actions were coming across. But then, one night, I overheard her on the phone with my mom. She was crying, fake crying, I realized, and saying things like, "I don't know what to do. He just doesn't care about me anymore. Maybe we shouldn't even get married." Hearing her manipulate my mom like that made my blood boil. She was painting me as the bad guy while planning this entire wedding behind my back, with no regard for what I wanted. The final straw came a few days later. I couldn't stop thinking about those messages I'd seen, especially the ones about her ex. Something about them didn't sit right with me, so I decided to check our bank statement. That's when I noticed she'd been transferring small amounts of money, $200 here, $300 there, into an account I didn't recognize. After some digging, I found out the account was joint with her ex. At that moment, everything came crashing down. The lies, the manipulation, the way she turned my family against me, it all made sense. She wasn't just pressuring me into debt for a wedding, she was setting herself up for a comfortable exit plan. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for not seeing it sooner. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She just flipped the script and accused me of invading her privacy. "If you don't trust me, maybe we shouldn't be together," she said, as if I was the one in the wrong. That's when I knew it was over. This wasn't the person I wanted to spend my life with. Hell, I wasn't even sure if the person I fell in love with had ever existed. Final update. After our confrontation, Sarah packed a bag and left, saying she needed space to think. I told her to take all the time she needed, but deep down, I already knew it was over. There was no coming back from this. The lies, the manipulation, the joint account with her ex, I couldn't trust her anymore. But what hit me even harder was the fallout with my family. When Sarah left, she immediately went to my mom's house. I know this because my mom called me the next morning, furious. "How could you do this to her?" she shouted. "She's devastated. She told me everything. I couldn't believe it." Even after all this, Sarah was still playing the victim, spinning the story to make me look like the bad guy. My mom refused to listen when I tried to explain what really happened. She said, "You've been spying on her, accusing her of things she didn't do, and now you're trying to back out of your responsibilities. Is that true?" I was speechless. Sarah had turned everything around on me. She even told my mom that I was emotionally abusive and that she left because she didn't feel safe. Not only had Sarah betrayed me, but now she was tarnishing my reputation with my own family. I tried to defend myself, but my mom wasn't having it. "You're lucky Sarah even wants to marry you," she said. That's when I realized there was no point in arguing. Sarah had gotten to them first, and no amount of evidence or reasoning was going to change their minds. At that point, I felt completely alone. My family was against me, Sarah had left, and I was stuck wondering how things had gone so wrong. But the universe wasn't done with me yet, because a few days later, I got a knock on my door that would change everything. It was Sarah's ex-boyfriend. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Why would her ex be here? I barely knew the guy. Sarah had only mentioned him a few times, always in passing, and I'd never met him before. But there he was, standing on my porch, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. "I know this is weird," he started, "but I think we need to talk." I invited him in, still trying to process what was happening. He introduced himself, let's call him Jake, and told me he'd been in contact with Sarah on and off for the past few months. He admitted they'd reconnected on social media and had been chatting casually, at least. That's how it started. But as time went on, Sarah started dropping hints that she wasn't happy in our relationship. She told him I was controlling and cheap, and that she felt like she'd made a mistake choosing me over him. At this point, I was already feeling sick to my stomach. But then Jake dropped the real bombshell. She asked me to help her with something, he said. She wanted me to open a joint account with her so she could put some money aside, just in case things didn't work out with you. Hearing that confirmed everything I'd suspected. Sarah wasn't just planning a wedding, she was planning her exit strategy. Jake showed me screenshots of their conversations, where Sarah explicitly said she was testing the waters with him and keeping her options open. She even joked about how, if the wedding went through, she could always divorce me later and come out ahead. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On one hand, I was furious. On the other hand, I was relieved to finally have proof of what she was doing. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the bad guy here, Sarah was. Jake apologized for his role in everything and said he wanted to come clean because he felt guilty. She's not who you think she is, he told me. I just thought you should know. After he left, I spent hours going through everything. The texts, the bank statements, the messages I'd found on her laptop. It was all there, clear as day. Sarah had been using me as a safety net while plotting her backup plan with her ex. I decided I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next day, I called a lawyer to discuss my options. I didn't want to hurt Sarah, but I also wasn't about to let her ruin my life or my reputation. The lawyer advised me to gather all the evidence I had and be prepared in case she tried to make things messy. Sure enough, Sarah made the first move. A week later, I got a letter from her lawyer. She was demanding compensation for emotional damages caused by the cancellation of the wedding. She claimed I'd led her on, wasted her time, and caused her significant distress. I couldn't believe the audacity. After everything she'd done, she was trying to play the victim again. But this time, I was ready. I showed my lawyer all the evidence I'd gathered, including the screenshots from Jake. When we went to court, Sarah's lies unraveled in front of everyone. The judge dismissed her claims and even reprimanded her for wasting the court's time. Watching her face as the truth came out was a moment I'll never forget. After the case was over, I sent a copy of the court documents to my family. At first, they didn't respond, but eventually my sister called me. She admitted they'd been wrong to take Sarah's side and apologized for not believing me. My mom, on the other hand, was less apologetic. She said something like, "Well, I still think you could have handled it better," which honestly just confirmed that I needed some distance from her. In the end, cutting ties with Sarah was the best thing that ever happened to me. It hurt, of course, but it also taught me a valuable lesson about trust, boundaries, and recognizing red flags. I've started reconnecting with old friends and focusing on myself for the first time in years. There's even someone new in my life, a friend from college who reached out after hearing about the breakup. She's been incredibly supportive, and while I'm not rushing into anything, it feels good to have someone in my corner.